heart is bleeding. And it feels really good. Isn't it amazing how when sound comes right from the heart, in the way music does, in the way especially Massenet's Thais does, it can go no other place but right to the ear of our ear and the heart of our heart. I know you're already listening, so the sermon's question has already been answered. Are you listening? Thank you, Sherry. Thank you. As I reflected this week, I thought anew of how extraordinary a promise we make at this church when we covenant to seek the truth. Because the world of truth is not often an easy one at all, is it? And yet, we here trust that there is a deeper truth, a truth of love, which can hold all truths. And so we seek the truth in love. So today I want to focus on one very practical and generally underdeveloped way in which we can put this power of love into practice in seeking truth. I want to talk about listening. I want to talk to this crowd of, like me, doers who like to be in action. But I want to talk about how the action of love through that listening can itself be an action of love. An action of love through which hidden and hard truths that need to be surfaced can be, and can be faced and healed and transformed. I want to talk about listening as an act of love that makes way for the deepest truths. Now, the irony of talking, as much as I'm going to, about listening is not lost on me. I want to assure you, I'm reminded of George Bernard Shaw, who said, "I believe in the discipline of silence so much I could talk for hours about it." But the subject of talking is not a bad place at all to start our explorations of listening. Talking, after all, seems to be something most of us have down pretty well. I should speak for myself, at least. I'm rarely at a loss for words. Fortunately, up here, I'm not alone in that, am I? No. And we have in the presence of Dr. John Wolfe, one of the great all-time liberal religious talkers, that is, preachers. John, I read that one of the other great Unitarian preachers, I'm sure you probably knew him well, Richard Gilbert, estimated that he uttered well over 10 million words from the pulpit over his 45 preaching career. So I'm curious, do you think you got him beat? Well, either way, fortunately, especially for you, quantity isn't the measure of good preaching. What makes for the kind of powerfully pastoral and prophetic preaching that John Wolfe filled this sanctuary with for his 35 years as All Souls' senior minister is actually, as Martin Lavenhara already said, listening. Deep listening in dialogue with the congregation, with the world, perhaps even with God. John once told Reverend Prose, if you don't know what to preach on, go visit someone in the hospital. And presumably, John, this wasn't just to try ideas out on them, right? Captive audience, as it were. Presumably, certainly from my own experience, you meant to listen to them. But I confess, despite my own proclivity for the spoken word, I often doubt the value of my words. I do. Especially at age 34, I think of the kind of guidance that I read articulated by Lakota Chief Wabasha, for example, who said, "Guard your tongue in your youth, and in age you may mature a thought that can be of service to your people." A thought. Yet here I am talking while Marlon and Gerald are listening, and Dr. Wolf himself is listening. It's a humbling honor. But the doubt, the discomfort I feel around talking so much is a good thing as well, I think. Barbara Wolf agrees. She's smiling pretty big back there. Many of us actually could benefit from a healthier dose of discomfort with our habits of talking. Because we're living in a world where humans are talking more and more and listening less and less. Perhaps talking isn't even the word because it implies conversation. And much of our communication has become broadcasting. 24-hour cable news style. Soundbiting, spin room spinning, talk show talking, heading, Twitter tweeting, Facebook feeding, emailing, messaging, texting, outputting, output. By the looks of it, is actually the measure in much of our lives these days. And the more we send out, the less, of course, we can actually receive. That is, receive well. It's like on those old cell phones, Marlon reminded me about, they used to have a send button and a receive button. Do you remember those? Right? And we got stuck on send. So much so that the manufacturer said, "Oh, actually, we don't really need this receive button after all." But we do, right? We need it badly. We need to listen, and we need to be listened to. A world without listening is a world without understanding. It's a world without authentic connection. A world of conflict. To put it bluntly, in the words of a sound expert, Julian Treasure, the genuine opposite of listening is violence. Shoot first, ask questions later. So why? Why are we stuck on send? Why do we insist on talking so much? Khalil Gibran, the great Lebanese spiritual philosopher, author of the widely read book, The Prophet, offers an answer I want us to consider. Gibran says, "You talk when you cease to be at peace with your thoughts. You talk when you can no longer dwell in the solitude of your heart. You instead live in your lips, and sound is a diversion." Gibran's suggestion is that it's when we can't deal with what's on our heart or on our mind that we can often use words to try to escape. We fill the lonely or the awkward or otherwise uncomfortable silence, cover up hard truths therein, and we miscommunicate. Can you relate to this? It makes me think of, you know how sometimes people will approach someone after they've lost a loved one, not knowing what to say, but instead saying way too much, talking on and on, sometimes maybe ending up using some worn out phrase that could do more hurt than help. And such talking is, of course, really to deal with one's own discomfort rather than meeting the person who suffered the loss. They probably just need a hug, a squeeze of the hand, a simple assurance of our love. Or maybe you've handled your own pain in that way sometimes, wasting a precious opportunity to speak your heart to a friend or maybe even your minister by talking about everything else but the actual source of your disquiet. Or maybe even, like me once upon a time, you've committed or been the victim of the classic dating blunder of gabbing away nervously all through dinner, maybe even with your mouth full at times, trying to make that winning impression, when the key to the heart of the person across the table, certainly to the mystery of your potential alchemy, lies in just shutting up and listening. Words, words, words. Hamlet, right? But also Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady. Yes, some heads are nodding. Eliza Doolittle, who screamed, "Words, words, words, I'm so sick of words, I get words all day through. Is that all you blighters can do?" She wasn't talking to her preacher, but to her courter, Freddie. In his endless proclamations, she responded, "Never do I ever want to hear another word. There isn't one I haven't heard. Don't talk of love. Show me. Show me." How do we move from even the most eloquent and earnest talk of love to showing our love and to seeking and sharing the deepest truth of love? Well, one thing I've found to be clear is that to reach the deepest truth of love, love that binds us all, we have to face a lot of harder truths along the way. We have to show up with love and meet these truths which aren't comfortable. We have to, as we say sometimes here at All Souls, stay at the table. So, having examined thoroughly the pitfalls of talking for the work of seeking truth in love, let's take a closer look at not talking. That is, let's look anew at how listening can be an act of love itself. A powerful way to show our love and give truth a chance to make an all too rare appearance. But before we jump right into listening to others, I want to just take a moment to remember that listening can be an act of love we give to ourselves. I was reminded of this in reading the book, The Wisdom of Yoga. Reminded how in Buddhist and early yoga traditions, satya or truthfulness, particularly truthfulness of speech, is a foundational practice. And Stephen Cope, the author, tells of how a friend of his who decided she really needed to turn over a new leaf and practice more truthful speech, found that habits of untruthful speech were so pervasive for her that to succeed in this endeavor, she actually had to refrain from speaking altogether. She had to shut up and listen to what was behind her words. Listen rather than edit her thoughts and feelings. After initially planning to keep silent for a week, Cope's friend remained silent for 3 weeks, hearing herself into a place of truth from which she felt she was ready to speak again. Listening can be an act of love through which we listen ourselves into more truthful speech and living. We may not have to stop talking altogether, even though some of our loved ones might think that's a pretty terrific idea. But we can listen to ourselves a little each day. We're worth this act of love we would offer others. We're worth our own ears. And we're relational beings. We're relational beings who, despite this capacity to listen to and be in loving relationship with ourselves, all need others in our lives who will listen to us in that deepest way and whom can count on us to listen to them. But the truth is, we keep much of the hardest truth beneath the surface because the world, frankly, doesn't seem interested in hearing and responding to what's really going on for us. But we don't have to play that game. We can listen each other into truth. And when we do, it is an act of love which can transform lives. Reverend Rebecca Parker, another of our great prophetic liberal religious thinkers, tells a story of how her close friend Maxine discovered how powerful the simple act of listening could be when her brother Lyle returned home from World War II. When Lyle came home, the only veteran to return alive to the small Iowa town that he'd left for the Western Front, the whole town came out to greet their hero. When the train pulled into the station, the band played, family and friends cheered and waved, and the mayor stood ready to shake his hand. But in response to the music and the cheers, Lyle just stared back mutely. So his family took him home to their farm. And he just sat there in the rocking chair in the parlor, not speaking, not sleeping, barely even eating. So Lyle's sister, Maxine, decided to keep her brother company. Whenever she could, she'd sit in the parlor with him, sometimes telling him what she was thinking about, but mostly just sitting there, snapping beans or mending socks, while Lyle remained stone-faced. And it went on like this for days, which flowed into weeks and into months. And then one night, late, Maxine was sitting with Lyle, quietly knitting, when she noticed the eyes in Lyle's still face fill with tears. And the tears spilled over and began to run down his face, followed shortly by great gusts of sobbing. Maxine just held him. And then he began to talk. He talked of the noise, the cold, the smoke, the death of buddies. And then he spoke of the camps, of mass graves, the smell. He talked all night, and Maxine listened. When the morning light came, she went to the kitchen and she cooked him breakfast, and Lyle ate. And then he went out into the fields and did the morning chores. Maxine listened to Lyle's truth even when it was locked deep within him. She listened him back into speech, back into life. In a world in which we're all struggling with truths we face in some way, do we want to clang cymbals, blow brass, shout cheers at our projections of one another? Or can we, like Maxine, just listen? Can we create space to meet each other wherever we may be, open our hearts and hear the truth in love? Listen one another and ourselves into spaces of truth where, as Gibran puts it, the voice within our voices can speak to the ear of our ears. Such listening and sharing soul to soul is not, of course, something we can just jump into the deep end with, not with anyone. So I'm not suggesting, let me be clear, that you just tell the next person who asks you how you are the whole truth, whatever it may be, in that particular moment, including maybe the impact of your early childhood traumas on your afternoon. And we're not going to receive this kind of personal disclosure from others right away. But we do need spaces for the sacred, truthful exchange made possible when we really listen. And we need practice in order to extend that kind of open-hearted space into our everyday lives, a little more at least. And that's why, again, I invite you to consider joining a once-monthly Soulful Circle for deeper connection and reflection here at All Souls. If you decide to try one out, that's at least an hour and a half each month that you're guaranteed to practice that art of deeper listening with other members of this community and to have that experience of being heard into deeper truth and connection yourself. You can sign up in the foyer today or anytime over at Soulful Circles at allsoulschurch.org. And Kate Starr and I want to invite you especially to come this Wednesday to the Soulful Circles program launch event at 6:30. But seeking this deeper truth of beloved community in which all individuals are truly heard takes me to just a final point I want to make before closing today, and that is that listening is an act of love that can also draw us toward justice. You've heard me speak before the incredible work of storytelling toward justice that we began last year in this church. Well, turns out the secret to surfacing the marginalized stories that call for our attention and then telling and living out new justice stories that respond to them is, yes, listening. Listening toward justice. Today is Labor Day weekend. It's a holiday when we honor the American labor movement and the struggle of workers for their rights in this country and the model of that struggle, one in which each individual is called to look out for the interests of all. Many may not know, but Saul Alinsky, who is the founder of community organizing justice work in this nation, as we've seen it in the 20th century, from the farm movement to farm workers movement to the civil rights struggle and many other justice movements. And Alinsky took his inspiration from workers' unions in Chicago in the 1930s. What he witnessed and what he was trained in began with labor organizers listening to the community, bringing people together to listen to one another and hear and learn what their struggles and needs really were, and then organizing these people to fight for their most pressing needs. What's amazing to me is actually how often, despite this model's obvious power, well-intentioned justice activists will just skip this most crucial foundational step of listening and leap right into action, leaping past listening and learning what truths truly need to be spoken to power, and past building the trust and connection and shared commitment needed for that incredibly hard work. All Souls, though, is taking part in a new community organizing venture here in Tulsa this year, built on Alinsky's approach, where listening is exactly where we begin. We, with more than a dozen other congregations of various faiths so far, and other institutions, are launching a city-wide listening campaign. And each organization is going to begin with themselves. And in this campaign, every ear matters. And every truth that we each have to share matters. So you can learn more about this new venture today in the foyer as well, especially if you're interested in being part of All Souls' core team. Talk with Deanna Tyrrell and Nick Renshaw out in the foyer. And you can even come to the next organizing meeting this Thursday. They can give you more information about that. And another way I just want to quickly flag that you can get involved in listening towards justice is to join Reverend Gerald Davis and the United League for Social Action as they continue a listening tour, inviting Tulsa residents to tell their stories of encounters with police brutality, racial bias, and over-policing. And to learn more, you can speak with Reverend Davis himself, maybe even catching him in the foyer today as well. We all know how to listen. I simply want to remind you just how powerful your ears are. They are instruments of love. When we let them do their work, they naturally connect us right to our heart, right to each other, and to the deepest truth we seek. If the opposite of violence is indeed listening, listening is an act of love that can bring us and our world much needed peace. Imagine a church whose members knock on doors all across this city, at least metaphorically, but instead of offering pamphlets or pitches, simply listen. Imagine being known and becoming even more trusted as a church because we love our neighbors as ourselves in this way. Because we learn how to lead our city even closer toward truth and the change truth asks of us through this radical act of love, through listening well. The world, it seems, is talking itself in circles around what's true. But we are, more so all the time, becoming a church that listens truth into the light. So where are you in your search for truth and love? Are the ear of your ears awake? Are you listening? Amen.
May you dare to dream dreams. May you dare to speak the truth. May you know your power to act. May love be your guide.
Thanks for tuning in online. We are so pleased with all the different people who have been tuning in from all over the country and all over the world to our ministry and what we're doing at All Souls here in Tulsa. If you have a chance to send me an email or connect with me in some way, let me know what you're finding, why you tune in, and what you're getting out of it. I would love to hear from you. I'm always pleased when I get messages from different people who tell me all kinds of things about the impact of All Souls Tulsa's ministry on them and their lives and their families. And if you get a chance to make a gift to support this ministry, to become a partner, we would love to partner with you and have you be a friend of the church and somebody who is actually supporting us to create this congregation and the world that we're trying to create together. You can be a part of it, and every gift of every amount makes a difference. We really appreciate your support.